may have heard that Israel is a settler colonialist project and a manifestation of Western imperialism and maybe even of white supremacy. Has anybody heard this? Everybody's heard this. So, the reality is, however, that the people who are standing against Israel and in favor of Hamas today on campuses are the latest exponents and often the useful idiots of the longest-lasting settler colonialist project in history. And they are the ones who are calling for imperialism and conquest. It is not the other way around. Now, the proof of this in the first place is simply the incidence of Arabic speakers in that region. There are Arabic speakers from Morocco all the way across to Persia. Now, of course, in Persia, they're not Arabic speakers, but Iraq and Iran, that's where the line is between the speakers of Arabic and speakers of other languages. All the way across from Iraq to Morocco, all across the Middle East and North Africa, they speak Arabic. What is Arabic? Arabic is the language that comes from Arabia. Arabia is not Morocco or Algeria or Libya or Sudan or Egypt or Syria or Lebanon or Jordan or Iraq. Arabia is Arabia. Why do all those countries speak Arabic? Why do many of them have native languages that are pretty much dead now? Do you know, have you ever heard of Coptic in Egypt? Do you know what Coptic means? Egyptian. That's the word Egypt. Copt and Egypt, it's the same thing. It's two variations on how to transliterate the word from the original Egyptian or Coptic language. In Egypt, when the Arabs conquered it in the 7th century, the ruling class spoke Arabic, and the conquered people spoke Coptic or Egyptian. And ultimately, over time, because the colonialists were so oppressive and they created rules that so oppressed the natives, but all the natives had to do to be free of the oppression was to convert to Islam and become Arabic speakers, Coptic began to die out. And in 1501, it was actually outlawed. It was made against the law to speak the native language of the land. And so now, there's hardly anybody that speaks Egyptian or Coptic, even the Coptic Christians who are about 10% of Egypt. There are Berber languages in the western part of North Africa, around Morocco and Algeria, gone. There are people trying to revive them now, but they were obliterated by the massive settler colonialist project that is Islam. Islam is an aggressive and imperialistic religion, and it is the key to understanding the Israel-Hamas conflict. Islam teaches this in chapter 8, verse 39. If you open up your Qur'ans to chapter 8, verse 39, you will see, fight them until persecution is no more, and religion is all for Allah. Fight them until persecution is no more, and religion is all for Allah. Now let's think about that for a minute. In the first place, it says to fight them. So this is supposed to be the perfect word of the Supreme Being that existed forever in paradise with that Supreme Being until he decided to send it down by means of an angel to a prophet, a man named Muhammad, in Arabia in the 7th century. That's the story. And so, fight them becomes a sacred act. It's not just war for purposes of defense or purposes of conquest or any other reason. It's war because it is a command of God. If you are a Jew or a Christian, or you are familiar with Judaism or Christianity, you may have heard of the 10 Commandments. Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not commit adultery, thou shalt not steal, etc. And those things are considered to be divine commands that are not negotiable. And this is the same thing. If the Quran says fight them, then that's a divine command that's not negotiable. Then it says until persecution is no more. So you get the idea that the fight is in defense because you're being persecuted. And so that's reasonable, right? If people are persecuting you, you can fight them. But that's not where it stops. It says, fight them until persecution is no more, and religion is all for Allah. Allah being the supreme being in Islam. It is generally considered to be the Arabic word for God, but it's really the God, as in the God that is designated in the Quran, the holy book of Islam. And so that's why the profession of faith in Islam says there is no God but Allah. La Allah illa Allah. There is no God but Allah. Allah is a very specific God who is the God of Islam. And the religion has to be all for him. So if you were a Jew or a Christian or something else, if you were a Hindu or a Buddhist, if you were an atheist, your religion is not all for Allah. That means they have a divine command to fight you. You can be minding your own business, not paying attention to them at all. You don't bear them any ill will. You are certainly not fighting them. You don't care about them. You're living your life, and they have a divine command to fight you. Does this mean that every Muslim is going to fight you and hates you? No. But it does mean that those who do understand it as a divine command, a holy struggle, and those don't end. You don't sit down at a negotiating table and say, we're going to negotiate away the divine command. Yes, God said in the Ten Commandments, thou shalt not steal, but we're going to make this agreement and sign it that says stealing is okay. It's not going to happen. And it's the same thing. In Islam, it is not possible to lay aside that command. And so the war against Israel will never be settled by some kind of an agreement or a negotiated settlement. It'll never happen because their religion is not all for Allah. And so they have to be fought. And there's more too. The land that is Israel has been the land of the Jews since time immemorial. There's abundant archaeological evidence of this. There is historical evidence of this. As a matter of fact, you ever heard of the West Bank? All right, did you know that the West Bank has only been called the West Bank since 1950? What was it called before 1950? Judea and Samaria. The Jordanians were occupying the West Bank, or Judea and Samaria, in 1950, and they changed the name of it from Judea and Samaria to the West Bank. Why did they do that? Because West Bank doesn't sound like anything. You know, what does it mean? It could be TD Bank. It doesn't mean anything. But Judea and Samaria, Judea, what does that mean? That's the land of the Jews. That's what that means. So they couldn't call it that when they were saying it wasn't that, you see. But Judea was always the land of the Jews. That's why it was called that. In 134 AD, the Romans, remember the Roman Empire? In 134 AD, the Romans had this recalcitrant people that they had conquered that kept rebelling against them, the Jews. And so the Romans expelled the Jews from the area of Judea in the year 134. And they thought, in order to really rub it in order to make them feel even worse, we will not only exile them from their homeland, but we will change the name of their homeland to the name of their ancient enemy from their holy book. So they looked into the Bible to see who the Israelites had been fighting. And they found the name of a long extinct people that the Israelites were fighting in the Bible. What were they called? The Philistines. And so they named the place in their own language Palestine in 134. Palestine was never the name of an ethnicity, never the name of a people, never the name of a nation. So now these dweebs come to you on campus and they say, we are fighting to free Palestine. Well, from what exactly? Palestine is Judea, the land of the Jews. And it was renamed in order to emphasize that it no longer belonged to the Jews. But if the Jews were to return to their homeland of Judea, it's where they would go. So the problem here comes in with Islam. When the Arabs conquered Palestine in the 7th century, then it became part of the caliphate, first of the Arabs, and then the Abbasid Caliphate, which was the Arabs, and then later of the Turks, the Seleucids. I'm sorry, I'm getting all mixed up. The Abbasid Caliphate, and later on the Ottoman Turks. The Seljuk Turks before that, excuse me. Now, the caliphates consider that they are the perfect land where Allah's law is in place, the land where the perfect law of Allah is implemented. And there is a very simple thing in the Quran, a very simple statement in chapter 2, verse 191. Drive them out from where they drove you out. Now, what that means in practice, drive them out from where they drove you out, is that any land that they ever had as part of the caliphate is part of Islamic land forever, because they have another divine command to throw out anybody who might come live there after them. So Spain was part of the Islamic Caliphate, and they lost it in the Reconquista. And so there are Muslims who believe that they have a divine command to fight to retake Spain. And the land that is now Israel was part of the caliphates, and so there are Muslims who believe they have a divine command to retake that land. But when they are retaking it, they are reasserting the original imperialist colonialist project that conquered it in the first place. So this is not an attempt to liberate an oppressed people. That's a lie. This is an attempt to reassert a colonialist victory that was part of the expulsion and attempted obliteration of the indigenous people. And so you have to be aware of these things and challenge them and be absolutely unintimidated and unafraid to challenge their narrative on campus in every detail. And so even when they tell you, we're fighting for the Palestinians, you know, we're fighting because the Palestinians are oppressed and we're against oppression, and it sounds good superficially. Okay, ask them, where were the Palestinians before the 1960s? Give me one piece of evidence from 1948 when the State of Israel was founded, or 1938 or 28 or 18 or 08 or 1808 or 1708 or 1650 or 1550 or any time back, any mention of the Palestinians anywhere. When the Romans established Palestine, renaming Judea, find me a mention of Palestinians. There isn't any. You can't find one. It's most striking when you go to the 1948 controversies about the founding of the modern state of Israel, and you look at the United Nations deliberations, where the United Nations partitioned the mandate for Palestine, which was for the establishment of a Jewish national home, that is the State of Israel, and they cut it in half because the Arabs kept killing Jews and claiming the whole land for themselves. So they cut this tiny piece of territory in half to establish a Jewish state and a 23rd Arab state. And the Arabs said, no, we don't want it. We want the whole thing, and we're going to fight a war to destroy Israel right now. But in all that time, in all those UN deliberations and the subsequent war between Israel and the 5 neighboring Arab states, not a single mention of Palestinians. And when that war ended in 1949, the Jordanians had control over Judea and Samaria, that is what they renamed the West Bank the next year. And the Egyptians had control of Gaza. And that occupation continued until 1967, when Israel won those territories back, which were part of the original mandate for the Jewish national home, and reclaimed them as part of the State of Israel, and ended the occupation of the Jordanians and the Egyptians. But from 1949 to 1967, try to find me a single word about occupation, about Gaza and the West Bank being occupied territory. Even though Jordan was an occupying power and Egypt was an occupying power, nobody said a word about the poor Palestinians or said a word about how they were occupied. Why not?
Because it wasn't theirs.
Because it wasn't theirs. Because the Egyptians and the Jordanians were Muslims, and the Palestinian Arabs were Muslims. And so, as far as they were concerned, it was once again part of the Ummah, the global Islamic community, and the infidels had been driven out. Remember, drive them out from where they drove you out, and consequently, there was nothing to complain about. Nobody said anything about Palestinian self-determination or independence or statehood, nothing, because the Palestinians did not yet exist. What happened was the Palestinians were established in the 1960s, and it was the greatest propaganda victory or success in the history of propaganda. The KGB of the Soviet Union supported the people trying to destroy Israel for a very simple reason. The United States supported Israel. And so in those days, everything was either you're in the Cold War, you're either with the United States or with the Soviets. So the Soviets supported the Arabs. And so the Soviets met with Yasser Arafat, the leader of the Palestine Liberation Organization, in 1964, and got him to change the name of it to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. Hardly anybody noticed. It seemed like the same thing. What's the big deal? Palestine, Palestinian. Well, there was a Palestine. It was just the name of a territory. To change it to Palestinian was to assert the existence of this people that nobody had ever heard of before and that never existed before. And they created this even tinier people to counter the narrative of Israel as this great underdog facing off against 22 giant Arab states and the other Muslim non-Arab states like Iran that wanted to destroy it. And now you had this even tinier people facing off against the mighty IDF. But it's all fake. There's no Palestinian people. They're Arabs, ethnically, linguistically, culturally, and religiously exactly the same as the Arabs of Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan. So why didn't they just move to Lebanon, Syria, and Jordan when they were exiled out of Israel? Because they weren't exiled out of Israel. The Israelis asked them to stay. The Arab Higher Committee told them, you better leave because we're going to obliterate Israel. We don't want you to be in the line of fire. And so they left. Then all the Arab states lost the war. And so things didn't work out for them to be able to come back as easily as they thought they would. But then the Lebanese and Syrians and Jordanians said, no, you can't become citizens. Why not? You know, there were population transfers after World War II on a massive scale. Have you ever looked at a map of Europe before World War II and compared it to after World War II and see how much smaller Germany is? Why? Because Germany started a world war and lost. And so the surrounding states thought, we need to protect ourselves against these people and make sure they don't do it again. And we're going to take some of their territory. It's going to be a punitive thing and a self-defense thing. And that's been a right of warfare recognized throughout history. And the Germans moved from what is now Poland and what is now Russia, and they moved back into what remains of Germany. Nobody said a word about it. Nobody protested. Everybody understood. This is what happens in wars. So the Jordanians and the Egyptians and the other Arab states lost a series of aggressive wars against Israel, but Israel is not allowed to reclaim the territory that was part of the original mandate. And now there's this myth that there's this occupied territory and that Israel has no genuine claim to the region. What is really happening is this is a reinforcement of this massive 1,400-year-old colonialist project to conquer and Islamize all of the non-Muslim territories in the entire world. There's no limit to fight them until persecution is no more and religion is all for Allah. It keeps going as long as there's somebody whose religion is not all for Allah. And so it's going to come here too, ultimately. But if they suffer a defeat in Israel at this time, then they're set back for a while, and they understand the world in terms of strength and weakness. So that could be a great boon to the entire free world. But right now, if it's up to your friends and colleagues on campus, that won't happen, and the jihad will be enabled and emboldened to strike here and elsewhere. So I commend you for standing on the front lines. I hope you found this informative.
Would you say that the pro-Hamas movement is actually a threat to the United States and it's a failure on our part in not condemning it more rigorously?
Yeah, the second question first, absolutely. The pro-Hamas movement is a threat to the United States. Just recently, Al-Qaeda, the international jihad terrorist group, issued a call to campus protesters to move to the next level. That, in other words, stop marching around and yelling and start blowing stuff up. And so watch for that. But these are the times that try men's souls. We have to stand courageous. And don't let that frighten you. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what is in store for us. Nobody even has the next moment guaranteed. We have to stand for what's right. As a great man once said, it is better to die standing up than to live on one's knees. In any case, that's one thing. Now, as far as the first part of your question goes, what is the U.S. government doing to combat Islamic terrorism? Nothing and less than nothing, and it's always been that way. As a matter of fact, the incursion into Iraq and Afghanistan right after 9/11 was based on false premises and wishful thinking from the start. And, when I was introduced, they said that I spoke to the FBI and U.S. Central Command and Army Command and all that, and that's true, but they weren't listening. And what they did was just the opposite of what I was recommending. In a matter of fact, the United States sponsored Sharia constitutions in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Sharia is Islamic law. It mandates second-class status for non-Muslims. It is deeply anti-women. It allows for the beating of women, and it's completely legal. And it calls for the death of people who leave Islam, as I mentioned, many other draconian and inhuman aspects. And the United States sponsored that in Iraq and Afghanistan. And George W. Bush, 6 days after 9/11, went to the mosque in Washington. And he said, Islam is peace. And he hamstrung our ability. He absolutely hampered our ability to speak to the real motivating force behind what hit us on 9/11. And we've never really recovered from that. And so the big error of the 21st century, as far as I'm concerned, is that the United States, after suffering a massive attack from Islamic jihadis, decided to ignore Islamic jihad and pretend it did not exist. And one part that they did not say when I was introduced was that I used to train FBI and military, but I was fired in 2011 because I spoke about Islam in connection with terrorism. And the Obama administration decided that they were going to have no mention of Islam or jihad in connection with terrorism. And so since 2011, the United States government has been pretending, and they were doing it before that to a tremendous degree as well, that Islam has nothing to do with terrorism. And yet, if you read what Hamas says, or Hezbollah, or Iran, or any of these groups today that are fighting Israel and threatening the United States, they all speak all about Islam. It's all about Islam for them. And yet that's the one thing that our entire foreign policy establishment and State Department absolutely is determined to ignore.
I'm wondering, do you think Islam can spark from Sunni Islam as well, or just Shia Islam?
Do I think that what can come from Sunni Islam?
Is terrorism...
Oh, yeah, sure. Most of the terrorists are Sunnis. Hamas is Sunnis. It's kind of odd because the Islamic Republic of Iran is Shiite and it funds Hamas. And usually Shiites and Sunnis hate each other. But there's an old Arabic proverb that translates, my brother against my brother and both of us against our cousin. And so the Sunnis and Shia hate each other, but they hate non-Muslims more, wow. Especially Jews. Chapter 5, verse 82 of the Quran, you can look it up right now. It says, the most intense in hostility to the believers are the Jews. So the Quran tells the Muslims that the Jews are their worst enemies. And then they go and look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict through that lens. So of course they see it the way they see it.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for speaking. I appreciate your quote from George Washington just a minute ago. But I wanted to say two questions for you. Would you say it's fair to make the assertion that the beginning of the unrest in the Middle East as we know it today was the fall of the Pahlavi regime? Second of all, my question to you is, there is a conspiracy theory out there, which I don't believe, by the way, but that the Khazars are the sort of ancestral of the European Jews. Mm-hmm. My question for you is, obviously that is historical. The Khazars were real. They did convert to Judaism. And I'm curious, when do you think that phased out, and what period of history do you think that kind of fizzled out along the way?
Okay, these are two very separate questions. So in the first place, as far as does the unrest in the Middle East date from the fall of the Pahlavi regime? No, because that was 1979. And before that, you have the Yom Kippur War in 1973, you have the Six-Day War in 1967, you have the war over the founding of the State of Israel in 1948. In between, you have the Suez Crisis in 1956. I think the real cause of the unrest in the Middle East is when the Saudis struck oil, because you had impoverished nations that suddenly were hugely rich, and they believed in jihad. They believed fight them until persecution is no more and religion is all for Allah. So they started using their oil millions to fight until religion is all for Allah. And so the resurgence of jihad in the modern era, I think, can be dated from that. Or you could say it dates from the abolition of the caliphate, the Ottoman Caliphate in 1924 by the secular Turkish government, and the founding of the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928 in an attempt to restore the caliphate. The caliphate is the Khalifa is the successor of Muhammad as the political, military, and spiritual leader of the Muslims. And the caliphate in Sunni theology is the only state that a Muslim should be adhering to. It's supposed to be the whole global group of Muslims. And there have been caliphates in the world in history, the Ottomans, the Seljuks, the Abbasids, the Umayyads, many others, the Fatimid Shiite Caliphate, so on and so on. Anyway, all of these claimed to be the one government for all the Muslims. None of them ever were, but it's still the dream of all the terror groups in the world today to control the entire world and reestablish a caliphate in order to unite the Muslims around the world. And that's what all the terror groups want to do. And so they've been trying to do that since the founding of the Brotherhood, from which comes Al-Qaeda and Hamas and all the others in 1928. So anyway, that's the first thing. As far as the Khazars go, it's just a lot of nonsense. I actually have a book coming out next March, watch for it, called Anti-Semitism, History and Myth, which shows that genetically the Jews of Israel are not from Ukraine, they're Middle Easterners. And so it's actually a falsehood, it's a lie that the Khazars are the ancestors of the Jews of today. But the point really is to delegitimize the idea that this is land that belongs to the Jews. And what we have here is an attempt to complicate what is really a very simple thing. This is a land that has been recognized throughout history as the land of the Jews. It was called Judea from time immemorial. There's superabundant archaeological evidence of the Jewish presence there. And there's a present-day people who call themselves the Jews, who speak the same language, and who consider this to be part of their tradition. And that this land has been central to that tradition, to the degree that on Passover, one of the holiest days of the year, they actually pray next year in Jerusalem, and always have, and Jerusalem is mentioned throughout the Jewish scriptures, whereas the Quran never mentions the Palestinians, who did not exist, or Jerusalem. So anyway, it's just an attempt to delegitimize a real historical connection. But even aside from history, the State of Israel has a legitimate right to the land on the basis of the fact that the Ottomans, when the Ottoman Empire was falling, ceded the territory that is now Israel to the League of Nations, the precursor to the United Nations. And the League gave it to Britain in what was called, as I mentioned before, the Mandate for Palestine, to establish a Jewish national home. And it was considered that, this is around 1920, 1922, that a Jewish national home would be fitting and proper in this land because it was Judea, and also because the Jews had been persecuted all around the world in various other countries. So it was considered to be something that could be done with this land that would solve several problems. And this land did not belong to anyone. The sovereignty over it had been the Ottoman Empire. And the Ottoman Empire ceded it to the League of Nations. The League of Nations set it aside for the establishment of a Jewish national home. So the only state that has any claim to that land is Israel. And so all of these other things are just an attempt to undercut that. This is the kind of thing, it shows it's very important to be fully informed.
Hello, my name's Diego Duarte, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on the roles of those Muslims who are Muslims, but they don't believe in the cause of Hamas or whatnot, whether or not they should work to reform Islam, if that's even possible, or they should just break off from being a Muslim entirely. Like, what would you say to those who are in that situation?
Well, it's a very difficult situation because, as I explained, there's a death penalty for apostasy. And so it's understandable that somebody who is a Muslim and dislikes Hamas and is not on board with the whole program that I've outlined here tonight, they wouldn't want to stand up and say that because they could get their head cut off for doing so. And so this is why you don't see big groups called Muslims Against Hamas or something like that. You know, I remember way back, probably before you were born, right after 9/11, there was a big demonstration, a big advertised thing, Muslims Against Terrorism, that was going to be a big demonstration in Washington. And it got international headlines, and everybody was talking about it because everybody was excited about this prospect that they wanted to see Muslims standing against these people. And about 50 people showed up, and most of them were not Muslim. The Muslims know, even those who are not believers, they know that the terrorists are acting upon teachings of the Quran. And so they could be called heretics, they can be killed as a result of saying that. So should they leave? Well, in the West so far, it's been pretty safe for Muslims who've left Islam. Although there was a very high-profile not really even an ex-Muslim, but he was a heretical Muslim, Rashad Khalifa, who was murdered in Arizona by other Muslims in the 90s. And so it has happened here. It could happen here again. And so I sympathize with ex-Muslims. I stand with them. I support them in every way. I understand if they don't want to declare themselves publicly. At the same time, I have great admiration for those who have the courage to do so.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mr. Spencer. My name is Alvin. I have two questions. The first one is, I have a friend, he and his family did a Christian mission in Jordan, and every time I posted something supporting Israel in my Instagram, he would immediately send me, tell me how Christians, Palestinian Christians, were also persecuted and killed in the war. So honestly, in that case, it makes me hard to respond. So do you have any suggestion? And also the second question is, do you think China, as you can see, they're trying to be or pretend to be a broker in the Middle East affairs recently. Do you think there is any way they will form a bloc, like a new axis in certain ways?
Oh yeah, China is working very hard to do that, and they could very easily do it because there are numerous economic incentives that they can offer. And so they've already got working relationships with, in the Belt and Road Initiative, with Pakistan, with Afghanistan, and with other Islamic entities. And so it's kind of ironic because the Chinese government is viciously persecuting the Uyghur Muslims in Western China. But the Muslim countries that they're dealing with, like Pakistan, they don't say a word about it because the money is too good. And they understand that they have to make some compromises. They understand strength and weakness, as I said before. They see the United States as weak, and this is why they're pressing forward in the West, whereas they see China as very strong, so they don't bother them, and they're happy to work with them. So there's a lot of possibilities with that. As for Palestinian Christians, it's a difficult and tragic situation, but the fact is that the Christian population in Israel has full equality of rights. The business about an apartheid state and all that is complete fiction. There is no legal distinction in Israel that denies rights to any non-Jews. And so the population of Christians in Israel has actually increased, whereas in all the Muslim countries surrounding it, it has decreased. So a lot of people are confused about this because they hear Christians in Gaza or Christians elsewhere saying how terrible the Israelis are. But you have to understand, it's very dangerous for the Christians in Gaza. And if they stood up and said, yeah, we support Israel, then they're going to get killed. They're in the middle of Hamas right there. And so they stand up and say, we love Hamas and we favor the rule of the Muslims over that of Israel. Because what else are they going to say, given the circumstances of where they live? But then that confuses a lot of people who are misinformed in the West or not fully informed. And they think that they need to stand with the Christians by standing against Israel. The fact is that Islam mandates a second-class status for Christians and other non-Muslims and denies them basic equality of rights, whereas there's nothing in Israel that does that for Christians or other non-Jews.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Isaac. I'm taking a class right now on Israel and Palestine, so I found this very interesting. I have a clarifying question. You talked about how losers of wars tend to, like they lose some of their land and they normally accept it, and use Germany as an example. My question was, would you say the same applies to Germany after World War I with the Weimar Republic and the loss of land such as the Rhineland leading to the rise of the Nazis and World War II?
Yeah.
So
there's a problem?
But my question is, would you say that they accepted it, though? Like,
no, they didn't accept it, and that's why we had World War II. But it was not that they didn't accept it because it was not a recognized principle. It's not that they said it's illegitimate to take land from us because we lost this war that we started illegitimately, and it's not that they objected to the principle, in other words. But they objected because, well, it's a complicated situation. They didn't, Hitler was saying they didn't really lose the war, that the Jewish backstabbers had caused them to surrender when they were actually winning, and that therefore the loss of territory was just an added insult over that. But you see, what the point I was making was that it's a recognized rule of warfare that an aggressor state can lose territory and doesn't have anything to say about it. Hitler never disputed that. He just didn't think that it should apply in that case. And so, was he right? I don't think so. But on the other hand, I do think that it's true that the First World War started for a variety of reasons. It really was totally unnecessary and totally uncalled for in every way. And so the Germans felt like they did have a raw deal after the war. And quite aside from the Jewish backstabbers thing, which was completely fictional, he may have been right that the Treaty of Versailles was draconian, and that's one of the reasons why he was popular. I'm not saying he was a good guy. I'm saying that you have somebody who is a vicious and violent demagogue. He builds on something that people can see is true, and then takes you from there into his world of lies and violence. And that's what he did with that. But the principle, nobody challenged.
That's my question. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Miles. I'm from Oklahoma State, and I had a question about U.S. support for Israel. So, given that the U.S. doesn't necessarily have a true direct cultural partner in this war, U.S. being underpinned by Christian Western values, Israel by Judaism, and the Arabs by Islam. What, other than for the sake of tradition of support over previous decades, would be a geopolitical or other reason for American citizens to take interest in the U.S. government supporting Israel or taking any side in this conflict?
Yeah, absolutely. That's very important. In the first place, the whole Middle East is authoritarian dictatorships, except for Israel. And so the United States fought these long, useless, stupid wars in Iraq and Afghanistan to establish Western-style secular republics in Iraq and Afghanistan that would be a light to the Muslim nations and help them to pacify the wider region. That was the whole George W. Bush idea. And it was wrong-headed for a variety of reasons, one being that these were Islamic states that had no democratic tradition, no interest in living in a secular republic. It was doomed from the start, the whole thing. But there is actually a Western-style secular republic in that region, and that's Israel. And it is the only state in that area that does share those values. I don't know that you're going to find really, quite aside from the propaganda that's become fashionable since October 7th, 2023, I don't know that you're going to find much daylight between the actual values of Judaism and of Christianity in terms of morality and so on. So that's actually very different from Islamic morality in terms of polygamy, child marriage, all these other things that Islam sanctions. But in any case, quite aside from that, you have the fact that they're both republics, that they both are free societies. You have the fact that they both face the same enemy, because Hamas and Hezbollah, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, they all have the same ideology, the same beliefs, 100%, as Al-Qaeda that hit us on 9/11, as the Islamic State that has been active in the United States. I was actually targeted in the first ISIS attack on American soil. They didn't get me, but they tried in 2015 in Garland, Texas. And those people hold to the same ideology as Hamas and Hezbollah. So I think that it would be short-sighted to say, well, that has nothing to do with us, because once Israel is destroyed, then they'll go after the great Satan. You know, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Ayatollah Khamenei talks about the great Satan and the little Satan. Many other Iranian officials do. America is the great Satan and Israel is the little Satan. Now, this is very important language. It's not just that he's saying the great bad guy and the smaller bad guy. He is saying something very much involved with Islam, because in Islam, you have the pilgrimage to Mecca. Do you know about the pilgrimage to Mecca? You got to make the pilgrimage to Mecca once in your lifetime if you can do it economically. And when you go to Mecca, what do? You have to do these various prescribed rituals that are involved in the pilgrimage. And one of them is you go to these big rock formations that are in Mecca, and you throw rocks at them. And they are called the great Satan and the little Satan. There's a big rock and a littler rock, and you throw rocks at them to signify your rejection of evil. Okay? So what the Ayatollah is saying is that to fight against Israel and the United States is a sacred act, is a holy act that involves a basic element of Islam in rejecting evil. And so once they destroy the little Satan, we would be short-sighted and naive to think they're not going to come after the great Satan. And you might think, oh, well, sure, but we're huge and they're not, and we could beat them easily. Well, I'm not so sure that that's true anymore with the Biden regime running things and the state of the military the way it is. But even aside from that, they can kill an awful lot of Americans, even without destroying the entire country or toppling the government. That would be very easy, and I would like to see that happen. So I think that we need to stand with all of the states that are threatened by the same jihad that we are, and that includes Israel. It's not limited to Israel, but it includes Israel.
Thank you.
Hi. Hi, my name's Ruby, and I was just wondering what your thoughts were on the protests that were happening in New York City, in particular at Columbia, and how it was all handled.
Well, what was interesting about Columbia was that it was a lot of outsiders. It was a lot of non-students. And it's very clear that the students, the pro-Hamas students, are getting help from professional agitators who are being paid to go on campuses and do this. And this is why they did this very skillful takeover of the administrative building there, and broke the windows and cut through the chains that were locking the doors, and got everybody in. Because these were not just crazy kids thinking this is the cool thing to do and I'm going to go and get high with my friends and live in a tent for Hamas. These are trained Marxist cadres. And so the implications of that are, of course, obvious and very serious. That these people are exploiting the situation on campus, and that is also a very likely source of the escalation that I noted before, that it's not just that Al-Qaeda is saying, now it's time to take it to the next level. They also got people in place who are ready to do that.
Thank you.
We have time for one final question.
Okay.
So, an important aspect of this conflict is the Iranian nuclear program, which is obviously very concerning. You know, like you said, their mission comes from God. So I think they would be more than willing to use nuclear weapons because their mission comes from God. They wouldn't really subject themselves to deterrence, for example. So if Iran were to go nuclear, which it seems they're very close to achieving, how would that impact the dynamic of the region?
Well, 5 million people dead. They could destroy the state of Israel completely. There are 9 million people in Israel, and they could be wiped out like that. And then the implications of that would be massive. Obviously, it would be expected that there would be a nuclear response. And this is, of course, this is the nightmare that people have, and we can hope that it doesn't come to that, because everything goes out of control after that. Where are you going to go from there, you know? But the Islamic Republic, this is one of the reasons why the Islamic Republic is so dangerous. Because, see, I mentioned before that they're 12er Shiites. Do you know what a 12er Shiite is? You do. But anyway, 12er Shiites, this is the idea. The Sunni Shiite split was over who gets to be in charge after Muhammad. And the Shiites insisted that one of Muhammad's followers, whose name was Ali ibn Abi Talib, was chosen by Muhammad to be his successor. And the Sunnis, for a variety of reasons, Right, the Sunnis don't believe that. They say that it was he didn't choose a successor, and it's up to the community to choose the best man to be his successor, the caliph. There's no caliph at all now, but anyway, this is the reason for the split. So the Shiites believe that there were a series of people they call imams. Now, an imam in Sunni Islam is like your local pastor or parish priest or the local rabbi or whatever. But in Shiite Islam, the imam is like the pope. He's the head of the community, of the spiritual community, as well as the military and political community, and he's the successor of Muhammad, but he's also a relative of Muhammad and of Ali, because Ali was Muhammad's son-in-law. He married Muhammad's daughter. So there were 12 imams after Ali, or 11. And the Sunnis kept killing them, because there were always more Sunnis. The Sunnis right now are about 85% of Muslims around the world. And because Islam is the way it is, the Sunnis are always killing Shia. And the Shia kill Sunnis too when they get the chance, but there are fewer of them, so it's tougher. So the Sunnis kept killing off the Shiite imam. The last imam was a 5-year-old boy. In the year 874, he disappeared. The Shiites say he went into occultation, into hiding. He's still alive. He's 1,200 years old now, but he's still alive, and he's going to come back at a time when the Muslims are persecuted more ferociously than they've ever been in history. Now, probably he was just killed by the Sunnis, but that's the Shiite story. He is the 12th Imam, and the 12th Imam in Shiite mythology is going to come back at the end of the world when the Muslims are being persecuted, that is the Shiites, and he's going to fight everybody and kill off everybody who doesn't convert to Islam, and then the world will be all Islamic, Shiite Islamic, and peaceful. All right? So, the 12th Imam is going to come back when the Muslims are more persecuted than they've ever been before. There was a president of Iran a few years back, Rafsanjani, who said that we could nuke Israel and Israel would be destroyed. And if they nuked Iran, we could lose 10 or 15 million people. We can sustain that. And he didn't mind the idea of losing 10 or 15 million people in a nuclear strike because that would be the persecution that would bring the 12th Imam back. And another president of Iran, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, he actually paved a highway to the place where the 12th Imam is supposed to come back. And so that 12th Imam could immediately get on the road and go to Tehran and start the killing. He takes this, in other words, very seriously. And so this is a doomsday kind of theology that could envision the deaths of millions of people. So we can only hope that the Islamic Republic will be stopped before they provoke that. But they could trigger nuclear holocausts in the world because they want that 12th Imam to come back. And that's how to do it.
Thank you. It's 2025. America's debt is over $37 trillion, and the dollar just had its worst crash since 1973. That puts your savings and your family's future at risk. That's why we trust Alpha Omega Gold, a company that stands unapologetically with Israel and supports Stand Tall Israel. Visit ao.gold/stand to claim your free precious metals wayfinder guide or call 1-855-426-4653 today. Protect your future before it's too late.